Class. So today we're going to talk about test usefulness. In other words, the qualities of language tests. First of all, we need to understand that part of our responsibilities as language teaching professionals will involve the selection, adaptation, or design of different kinds of tests. Let's imagine, for example, that we're trying to decide what proficiency test to choose to certify our level of English or to certify the level of the students that we have. Of course, there are many options available. First of all, we can mention the English Language Assessment System for Hispanics 2, better known as ELAS 2. And of course, there is also the ITP version of the TOEFL, which is an institutional paper-based test. And if we talk about the ITP, we also need to mention the IBT version of the TOEFL, which is the international computer-based version of the test. There is also, of course, the TOEFL Junior, which in this case, it's obvious that it's intended for young learners. And what to say about the International English Language Testing System? IELTS is one of the most important proficiency tests in the market. But of course, there are some new exams such as APTIS, developed by the British Council. It was just launched in 2019. And what to say about the famous Cambridge series of tests, the PET, the CET, the FIRST, the Advanced, and the Proficiency, the test of English for International Communication, developed by the Educational Testing Service, and of course, Trinity College London, which has two different kinds of tests. First of all, the graded examinations in spoken English, or GC, versus the integrated skills in English. So all of these are very prestigious exams, very renowned exams, and the question is, which is the best one? If I want to certify my level, if I want to have the level of my students certified, which is the test that I have to choose? So this leads us to think about the elements of test usefulness. All of them can be pretty expensive, so it is very important to know before we decide to take one test, what is the best option that we have. Now, the answer to these questions can be given by some elements that we call the qualities of language tests. So there are some specific features that will make one exam better than another exam. And we can summarize the different elements of test usefulness as construct validity, the first one, and we also have reliability. So different exams have different levels of reliability, and of course the impact. We usually try to look for an exam, for a test that has a great impact on, of course, ourselves as people, but also on the educational institutions, on the society in general. There is also interactiveness, and interactiveness is another feature of test usefulness that is very important to decide, to use in when we want to choose a text or a test over another one. And of course, there is authenticity. So every exam has a certain level of authenticity, and we're going to look for a test that is more authentic. And finally, we have another element that is very important, and it's called practicality. So what we look in a test 2 is a certain level of practicality that allows us to use it with a very, very efficiency of cost and efficiency of all of the resources that we need. And this is what practicality is all about. Now, we're going to look at these elements one by one. And let's start by talking about reliability. Reliability refers to the consistency of measurement. That means that any test should give you about the same results across test administrations. This means that if I take the TOEFL test today, and if I take it in 2 days, I should get about the same score. Why? Because between today and 2 days later, there is not a great change of proficiency. So my score should be basically the same. So every time that I take the test, if I didn't do anything extraordinary, I should get about the same results. This is what happens, for example, when you weigh yourself, right? If you want to know your weight, you're going to use an instrument, it's called a scale, to weigh you, and then you get on the scale and you're going to see your weight. If it says 40 kilograms, as this is the case with me, I weigh 40 kilograms. It says 40. I get off the scale, I get on the scale again, and the scale is going to say 40 kilograms. If it says more or if it says less, obviously the scale will not be reliable. It is exactly the same thing with test. So the test should give you the same consistent results across different administrations. This is called reliability. And there's another kind of reliability also across the test tasks. That means that if I take a test and I get a high score on a multiple choice task, I should have also a high score on another kind of task, such as filling in the blanks or reordering or completing a sentence or on the listening section, on the speaking section. That means that normally a test measures proficiency or competence, and this competence, if it is linguistic language competence, it should not vary that much. That means that somebody who's good at reading should be good at listening. Somebody who's bad at reading will also be bad at writing. This is a general principle. So across the test tasks, we should have similar results. So imagine if somebody got like the highest possible score in listening and then got the lowest possible score in reading. This will be not very logical, because normally we expect that language competence is general. That means there is some variation, but it shouldn't be like a great level of variation. So this is another kind of reliability, and a test should give you consistent results across all of the different tasks. There is also another kind of reliability, or another way in which we can see reliability, and it is that the test should give you also the same results across the test forms. If you remember, when you take the TOEFL test, you never take the same test. This is because there are different test forms. That means that every time you take the test, to make sure that it's reliable, they will give you a different version of the test. You will never take the same version of the test, of course, unless you take lots of tests very, very frequently. But there are different test forms, so it shouldn't really matter if you use the version A or the version B or the version C or the version D of the test. All of these versions, all of these different forms of the test should give you the same results, and this is what we call reliability. So a good test has different versions of the test, and all of these different versions of the tests give you similar results. This is what we call reliability. And finally, there is a last kind of reliability, and this is that the test should give you similar results across raters. That means that it doesn't really matter who give you the test. You should get the same result if the test as an instrument of measurement is reliable. So if you take, for example, a speaking test, a Cambridge speaking test with one person, and if you take it with another person, because remember that there are different people who are going to give you the interviews, so you never get the same people, the same person when you take a speaking test. So regardless of who is giving you the test, who is rating, who's marking your exam, you should get similar results. Okay, so this is another kind of reliability. It's called inter-rater reliability. So it doesn't matter who gives you, who administered the test, you should get similar results. If the exam gives you similar results across test administrations and across test tasks and across test forms and across raters, this means that the exam is reliable. Now, different kinds of exams include different kinds of procedures to ensure reliability. I am going to give you one example here with the TOEFL ITP test. Now, in the case of the TOEFL, there are some specific statistical procedures that are going to ensure that the score that you're getting is reliable. So what they are going to do in this case, that they're going to take your raw score, that means all of the number of correct answers, and they're going to convert it by statistical means to a number on a scale. If you remember, the TOEFL ITP is a norm reference test. That means that they will measure your performance as compared to the performance of other people. So these scores are reported as scales that range from 31 to 68. So they report the total scores on a scale from 310 to 677. So this means that a score below 310 doesn't mean a thing, and there's nothing else above 677. Why? Because they have determined by administering the test to a really large numbers of people that these are the levels that are considered, like the lowest acceptable measure level and the highest possible level that has been calculated statistically. So in this way, they make sure that you will not have different results, that your results are going to be reliable, because they're going to fall into the scale scores that they have already determined by statistical procedures. Now, these kind of procedures make sure that you will get very, very similar score on different editions of the test. So if you see, as it says in on the TOEFL, as it established in the TOEFL test specifications, a total score of 500 points, for example, on one edition of the test represents exactly the same level of English language proficiency as measured by the test as a score of 500 points also on another edition. So this means that by means of their statistical analysis, they can make sure that no matter what version of the test you take, you will always get the same results. So in every test syllabus that you're going to read, you will see that the different examinations and the people who produce these examinations, they will give you an estimate of the level of reliability of their exams. And it is important to look at this before making a decision, because we need to make sure that we're using a reliable instrument. Now let's talk about construct validity. Now construct validity, if you remember, because we talk about constructs, has to do with the extent to which we can interpret a given test score as an indicator of the abilities or construct that we want to measure. So this means that if we are given a test, this test has to measure the thing or the ability that we want to measure. It implies also the domain of generalization. In other words, the set of tasks in the target language use domain to which the test task correspond. So this means that when a test is valid or has construct validity, is in that moment when the test reflects in the task that you do in the test the similar kinds of tasks that you will do in real life. That means that if I get a good score on the test, this means that I should be very proficient. And this means that if I get a low score on the test, this means that my proficiency is very low. This is what we call validity. If a person is very proficient in the language, can communicate, can do lots of things, the person should get a high score. And if the person is unable to communicate, to express him or herself, or has a lot of problems, when speaking, this person should get a low score on the test. Because remember, a test represents an ability. A test is trying to measure an ability. And to the extent that the scores correspond to the real performance of a person, the test is going to be valid. Right? So the test score should reflect real ability. And the kind of things that you do in the test should reflect real life tasks. That means that what you're doing on the test should be very, very similar to what you should be doing in real life. And if you remember, of course, when we talk about construct validity, we refer to the model of language proficiency that the test is using. And if you remember, communicative competence is a very complex construct because it involves, your knowledge, your abilities, your attitudes, your strategies, and it's reflected on different components such as linguistic competence, pragmatic competence, strategic competence, and there are lots of elements, within these general competencies such as phonological and lexical, grammatical, functional, discourse, sociolinguistic, intercultural, communication, and learning. So a test has to reflect the complexity of this model for it to be valid. If it's valid, it's because it is reflecting what language really is. And as you can see, language is very complex. Language has a lot of elements, and all of these elements are interrelated. Now, when we talk then about the target language use for a lay graduate, in other words, if I am going to give you a test and I want the test to be valid, to have construct validity, what should I measure? To be able to do this, I need to ask myself how you will use the language in the future for your professional life. Because if I am teaching you English, and if I want to measure your English abilities, I need to know first of all what kind of things you should be able to do in English, so that I consider that I was successful in my teaching, that I was successful in my assessment of your proficiency. So, some of the things that a lay graduate should be able to do with the language is to be able to hold a job interview in English. That means that you're going to look for a job, they're going to interview you to know your level of proficiency, to know how good you are at speaking in English, and of course you should be able to have a good job interview in English. Another kind of task should also be teaching English and lecturing. That means that your proficiency is going to be reflected in the future to the extent that you can give a lesson in English, that you can give a lecture, that you can explain things in English. If you can do this, that means that you are proficient. And if you can't, that means that you are not proficient. Another thing will be attending conferences in English, because of course, as part of your professional life, you will go to different kinds of congresses or forums where you will listen to other people presenting in English. And of course, in your professional life, you should also be able to do research. That means that to get information, to analyze the information in English, and then use it for research purposes. And of course, you should be able to present this research in different congresses or in different forums, or with your colleagues, with your supervisors, directors, or other people in English as well. And of course, a part of your success is going to be measured to your ability to talk to native speakers. That means that you should be able to have a conversation with another person in English. And I think if we include another one, we will want you to be able, after you complete your studies here, to be able to continue your education by pursuing graduate studies in English, for example, a master's. So, as you can see, these are the things that you, as a graduate of the Language English program, should be able to do. Now, this is your target language use. So, if I am going to assess your proficiency, I need to look for an instrument, for an exam, for a test that measures your abilities in this kind of tasks. So, the kind of test that I should use should be a test that assesses your speaking competence, your academic reading competences, your academic writing competences, okay? And of course, all of these things should be measured in terms of production. I am not going to measure only your comprehension, I need to measure your production. I need to be able to know what you can really do with the language. Okay, so then this is what we call construct validity. If I have an exam that helps me to measure these things, my test will be valid for you, because it's going to assess your target language use and the construct of communicative competence that I am using in your formation as English language professionals. Now let's look at some examples to illustrate or to see or to try to compare how construct validity can be different in different tests. Let's get this example from ELAS 2. If you remember, ELAS refers to the English language assessment for Hispanic speakers. Now, this exam, the ELAS, has 3 parts. Part number 1, we have listening comprehension, and we have 50 questions that you have to answer in 25 minutes. The second component of the test is the use of the language and indirect writing. There are 40 items, and you have to answer them in 35 minutes. The last component of the test is reading comprehension and idiomatic expressions. There are 45 items, and you have to answer them in 60 minutes. Okay, so what am I measuring? What is the test measuring? What is the construct of this test? Listening comprehension, okay, language use, that means grammar and indirect writing, and of course reading comprehension and idiomatic expressions. As you can see, this test measures only, or basically, comprehension skills. It doesn't measure production skills. That means that there is no component of the test that can really show me that you can use the language to produce something, to communicate, to interact with other people. Go back here just for a minute to show you how this is an example of indirect writing. According to the people who developed this test, they are measuring indirect writing. And something that I want you to think about is, the kind of item. Okay, so as you can see, the only thing that you need to do is to choose the option that contains all of the information from the original, that keeps the original meaning. But of course, this kind of task is very artificial. It's very strange, because in real life, I think nobody says the old black and white car broke down yesterday. This kind of language is not used in real life. It's a very, very weird sentence. The old black and white car broke down yesterday. Okay, so they are measuring your writing, but if you see, they are measuring in a way that does not reflect real life performance. This is not something that you would do in real life, and so the construct validity, what ELASH is measuring, is not very valid, because first of all, as we could see in the previous slide, ELASH measures only comprehension, basically comprehension, but not production. And also the way that it tries to measure the skills, in this case writing, has a kind of language and a kind of task that do not reflect what you will do in real life with the language. So when you will be using English in real life, people are not going to give you like the different kinds of options and ask you to choose which one you think is correct. And in real life, you will never say, and I can guarantee that you will never say something such as the old black and white car broke down yesterday. That is just something that in real life will never be said. It's grammatically correct, but you will never say that in real life. Nobody will say that kind of thing in real life. Let's look at another example. Now, we're going to analyze another test that is called Integrated Skills in English by Trinity College London, and let's see what it measures. These are the things that are measured in the test. So the first component of the test is a portfolio, and it includes writing correspondence, factual writing, that means reports, analysis, and there's also critical and analytical writing, the kind of writing where you express your points of view, where you analyze information. Okay, and the weight of this task is 20% for correspondence, 40% factual writing, and 40% to critical and analytical writing, and it's 20% of the total score. Okay, now the second component is control written examination, and in this case there are 3 tasks. So that means that you need to write something. You have a writing test, you have task number 1, task number 2, and task number 3, and as you can see, this is divided, the 100% of this task is divided in equal proportion, 33.33% for each, and this corresponds to a 30% of the total score. And finally, you have an interview, and in this case you have to give a formal topic presentation. That means that you have to give a presentation about a topic. There is a discussion of the topic with the tester, and there is an interactive task, there is a listening task, and there is a discussion of the portfolio and a conversation. Okay, so if you see in this case, the difference between ELASH and Trinity College London is that Trinity College London is analyzing productive skills. In this case, you have to write correspondence, an email, a letter, and then an informal letter, an informal email, that kind of thing. You have to write an essay, you have to defend your point of view, you have to analyze some information. Okay, And also, you need to be able to give a presentation in the language. You have to have a topic discussion to interact with another person. Okay, you have to discuss about the things that you wrote in your portfolio, so you have to listen to the person as well. You should be able to have a conversation. As we can see, in terms of the construct, in terms of the skills that are being measured, Trinity College London integrated skills in English has a much higher level of construct validity than ELASH. Let's look at one of the tasks. Okay, this is one of the tasks in the control written examination. So let's look at the instructions. The candidate's reading and writing skills are assessed in the control written examination. 2 assessment criteria are applied in the control written examination: task fulfillment and accuracy and range. For each task, candidates are awarded 2 letter grades using a 5-point scale. A, so A is the highest and E is the lowest. The task fulfillment is based on the following factors. Okay, so number 1, the overall achievement of the communicative aim, the organization of the text, the appropriacy of the format, the style and register, and the effect on the reader. Okay, and also the accuracy and range refer to the use of the specified grammatical, functional, and lexical requirements of the level and accuracy of spelling and punctuation. Okay, so when assessing control reading exams tasks, a 10% tolerance above and below the stated word length is applied. So as you can see here, what we have in the integrated skills in English, Trinity College London, is an assessment of lots of different communicative elements. So there is a communicative aim. The test has to be organized. The style, the register, and the format of your writing had to be appropriate, and also you have to make an effect on the reader. We can clearly see that this task has a higher level of construct validity than we'll have in ELASH. There is absolutely no doubt that in the case of Trinity College London integrated skills in English, the task of the test correspond more to what you will do in real life, and also it assesses your ability to communicate in the language. So the level of construct validity is much higher than the one of ELASH, in which only comprehension is measured but not production, and also in the use of the tasks that are not very similar to what you will do in real life. The tasks in ELASH are tasks that do not correspond to what you should be able to do as a graduate of an English language program. So we can clearly see with these 2 examples what we mean by construct validity, and how we can compare 2 kinds of tests, in this case ELASH and ISE Trinity College London, as 2 different kinds of tests that have different levels of construct validity. Okay, now just to finish talking about Trinity College London, there is also an interview, and you have basically the same thing. It is a full interview. You have to cover the communicative skills, the language functions, the grammatical, lexical, and phonological items. Okay, the accuracy on all of these features: grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. Okay, and also your fluency and the promptness of your response that has to be appropriate for the level. So basically, integrated skills in English, Trinity College London really measures all of the elements of communicative competence. The model that we looked at in class that reflects communicative competence is reflected in the different kinds of tasks that exists in Trinity College London. So Trinity College London has a really high level of construct validity. Now, let's see how construct validity interacts with other elements of test usefulness. So, as we said, the score interpretation refers to the inferences about language ability. That is the construct definition. In other words, if I get a high score in the test, this high score should reflect a high level of proficiency, the way that I define it in my construct. Secondly, the score interpretation has to do with the domain of generalization. So this means that the kind of things that I do on the test should be similar to the kind of things that I will do in real life. That means that I should use language for communication. Now, on the other hand, when we look at language ability and the characteristics of the task, we have, of course, what we call construct validity, right? So, if the score on the test reflects my language ability, I have construct validity. On the other hand, if the characteristics of the task, the things that I do on the task, are similar to the things that I do in real life, this is called authenticity. And of course, when my test scores reflect all of these elements, we have something else that is called interactiveness. That means that the kind of things that I do on my test task should reflect the kind of things that are the elements of language ability. So we can see an interrelation between construct validity, authenticity, and interactiveness, and we are going to talk interactiveness in a few minutes. So, just to summarize this part, there is a different interaction of these qualities in the test design. So, construct validity refers to the ability that we want to measure, the type of task, and the way of that each task has in the total score. We have the content validity, which is the content to be tested, and we have the face validity, or we call backwash. In other words, the effect of the exam on the test takers. That means that if I consider that I'm a proficient speaker and I get a high score, this will mean that the validity of the test to me is very high. On the other hand, if I am a very good speaker, if I know that I can communicate really well and I don't get a good result on my test, in this case I'm going to feel like the test was not fair, that something is wrong. In other words, the exam will not have a good level of face validity, also called backwash. Now let's just look very quickly at another element of test usefulness, which is authenticity. Now, authenticity refers to the degree of correspondence of the characteristics of a given language test task to the features of a target language task. TLU means target language use, the things that we will do in real life. So, authenticity provides the means for investigating the extent to which score interpretation generalize beyond performance on the test to language use in the target language use domain. In other words, the kind of things that I do on the test should reflect real life tasks. Example, writing a letter. If they ask me to write a letter in the test, the authenticity of the test will be high because writing a letter is something that we do with the language in real life. If they ask me, on the other hand, if I get a task on the test that is, for example, filling in the blanks, this task is not very authentic because in real life, like, people don't speak to us with blanks that we have to fill, or we don't have to fill into words with blanks. This is a task that in real life we would not do, so it's not authentic. Another element of authenticity is the kind of texts or the audio that are used in the test, which can also be more or less authentic. Example, if in my exam I read a text that was taken from a newspaper, that was taken from a real magazine, or if I listen to something on the test that is from a radio program or from a documentary or from an interview, a real interview to an artist, for example, these recordings and these texts are very authentic because these are things that were actually produced in real life for real native speakers. So these kind of elements are very authentic. But if on my exam I read a text that was invented by another person just to show the present tense or the present progressive or the past conditional, in this case this text is not authentic because it was written just to measure the language, but it didn't exist in real life. It's not an example of a real text that somebody wrote for communicative purposes in real life. And the same thing, if we have recorded conversations where people, as you remember in the recordings for the textbooks and the exams, there is no noise, there is no background noise, and people speak very slowly and they use words that we don't use in real life because they are not real speakers, they're actors. They're actors performing a role, they're just actors reading a dialogue that was written. In this case, of course, these kind of elements are not very authentic because they don't reflect real language. Because if you remember the conversation in Spanish that I showed you about a Spanish textbook, if you remember, the language was very artificial. The way that the speakers communicated was very strange, and of course it doesn't really matter if we can understand or not. The thing is that in real life we're never going to listen to that kind of conversation. But if on my exam I listen to a mini documentary that was really produced for native speakers, in that case that is authentic because it contains the elements of communication that are needed for a person to really be able to understand the language. That means you can understand the conversation in your recordings in your textbook, but this is not going to guarantee that you can really understand a documentary, a movie, a real interview, because they are very different. So an authentic test summarizing is one in which the things that you do reflect real life things. And also a test is authentic if the texts, if the listening exercises that you hear are elements that were taken from real life, like real interviews, real documentaries, real conversations. This is what makes a test authentic: the degree to which the test tasks and the language elements that they give you are similar to the ones that you will see, that you will face in. Now we're going to look at another example again from ELASH 2, okay, the English Language Assessment System for Hispanics. In this case we have this little exercise. Exercises 1 and 2 are based on the following paragraph. Then again, if you see, the instructions are in Spanish. So we have, let's look at this. Hi March, I'd like you to drop by my house later tonight. We're having a surprise party for Henry. Everything is almost ready. I just need to take care of a few more odds and ends. By the way, would you please do me a favor and get in touch with Kenya? Remind her though not to spill the beans. You know that she tends to get carried away. And the question is, in line 1, drop by means to, and we have the options: A, fall into; B, jump over; C, visit; D, go. We have 4 options. These are multiple choice question. Now I want you to look at something here. First of all, if you can see, this text was written by the person who developed the test, by the test writers. It was only created to show you different kinds of idioms. We have drop by, we have odds and ends, we have spill the beans. Okay, so we have 3 idioms, and the person wants to see if you understand those idioms. But so the task is very artificial because we're doing multiple choice. In real life, people don't speak to you with multiple choice like, hey, do you want to blank, go, B, went, C, is going, D, has gone to the movies today. Nobody talks like that. You don't have to choose between options in real life. In real life, you produce a whole sentence or you listen to a whole sentence. So this is completely artificial. It's not authentic. And on the other hand, I want you to look at the kind of text. Okay? So look at the whole text and tell me if it reflects a text that will be written in real life. Does it look like a letter? No, we can see that it doesn't look like a letter. Is it an email? No, it doesn't look like an email. It is not an email. It doesn't have the elements of an email. Is it a text message? Imagine that you send this message to a friend, using WhatsApp or just regular text messaging. Would you write like that? No, if you see, it is not a text message. It is not a WhatsApp message. Because if you were using WhatsApp, this is not the kind of language that we use. So we can see that the text is not authentic because it is nothing. It is not a text that you will write in real life. It is not a letter, it is not an email, it's not a text message. What is it? It's nothing, because in real life you will not write that kind of thing. Okay? If you were a letter, you would use formal language. There will be certain elements. If you were an email, it will be basically the same thing. And if you were a text message, the kind of language that we use will be very, very concise. We can also see that the text is using informal language, high march, but on the other hand, the text is using formal language. Would you please do me a favor and get in touch with? Okay, this is very formal language. If you communicate with a friend, you will not say, would you please do me a favor? Okay, that you just tell her, tell Kenya, right? And also, I'd like you to drop by my house. Like, this is later tonight. Okay, this is very formal language. So the kind of language that you see in this text is both formal and informal. It doesn't look like a letter, it doesn't look like an email, it's not a text message anyway. So this text is completely artificial. Nobody in real life, I can guarantee that nobody in real life will write something like that, because we don't write like that to our friends. We would use a very different kind of language with a very different kind of structure. So this text will not exist in real life, and the kind of language that you see will never be seen in real life. And so ELASH has very artificial kinds of tasks that do not reflect real life, that were created only to test the language. This is only the person, an expert, wrote it just to make use, just to try to see if you know the idioms, just to check if you can identify the idioms. But doing this kind of thing will not guarantee that in real life you will be able to understand idiomatic expressions. Now let's look at a task for integrated skills in English, Trinity College London. Let's see what it is like. Okay, this is the control written paper for ISE4. Okay, you need 3 hours to do this, and you have 3 tasks. Task number 1, reading into writing. You're going to synthesize a text. Okay, text synthesis. So read the information below, then in your own words write an article, approximately 350 words, for a sociology journal. Number 1, summarizing the information given of the growth of social networking, discussing its impact on different generations, and discussing the potential implications of personal information being easily accessible. So first of all, if we look at the task, this is something that we will do in real life, to synthesize information from a text, in other words, to summarize it, and then present, discussing different kinds of implications and giving your point of view. This is something that you will do in real life. So you have to write an article, and you have to write an article for a journal, and you have to talk about something that is a real life topic, social networking. Okay, you're going to discuss the impact on different generations. So anyway, as you can see, the kind of task is very authentic, because this is something that you at some point will be asked to do in real life. In real life, you know, at school, in the university, for your job, you have to write this kind of text, like to summarize information and then, you know, give your opinion about something. That is the first thing. Now let's look at the text that they use. They use different text because if you remember, you have to summarize to read the information and then use the information. So we have a little article, social networking on the move, and you can read the success of social networking sites such as Facebook, Weibo, and even YouTube could represent the next boom for the mobile phone operators. So we have a text that you need to read. This is the text. As you have information, we have percentages, we have different kinds of figures, all kinds of data. And I want you to see here at the end, it says source adapted from The Guardian. So as you can see, this text that you are reading, that you have to summarize for your examination, was taken from a real source, because I think everybody knows The Guardian, right? You know The Guardian it's very famous in the United Kingdom. So the text that you are reading, ladies and gentlemen, it was adapted, probably because it was made shorter. They made it shorter so that you have to read the whole journal article. So it is adapted from a real source. So this was a text that was written in real life for the purpose of communicating information. It is not an artificial text. It is a real text that was taken from one of the most prestigious newspapers in England. And this is another kind of information that you need to summarize. Then again, it was adapted from the same article, and it shows you the number of visitors in a given year, 2007, for the different networking sites. We have MySpace, Facebook, tagged and all kinds of social networking sites. So then again, this diagram, this figure was adapted again from The Guardian. So if we compare this task to the one in ELASH, we can see that they are different in two important ways. Number one, that the kind of thing that you are required to do in ELASH is an artificial task. In real life, you do not select options, linguistic options. Okay? And in Trinity College London, in this exam that we're looking at, you have to do something that you would do in real life, to write a report for a journal. And also the second aspect in which these exams are different, that is that in ELASH they created a little text for you to read that is not a real text. It doesn't have any characteristic of a specific discourse type. It is not a letter, it is not an article, it is not a report, it is not an email. It's just an artificial text that doesn't exist in real life. But if you see in Trinity College London, you will read text and you will look at information that was created for the purposes of communication, that was taken from original sources, like in this case The Guardian, or they take it from different sources, but these are real text. So to summarize, the level of authenticity of ELASH is very low because it has artificial tasks and it uses artificial texts. The level of authenticity in Trinity College London is very high because they require you to do things that you will do in real life, and the kind of texts that they show you are real texts that were produced in real life for the purposes of communicating, not of testing the language. Real communication. These are things that you will see in real life. So this is authenticity, the extent to which the test task reflects real life, and also to the extent to which the kind of language that you are exposed to in the text, either written or either recorded, show examples of real language that was produced for the purposes of communicating. This is what we call authenticity. Now, what is interactiveness? Interactiveness is another very important element of test usefulness, and it has to do with something very important as well. Okay, interactiveness is the extent and the type of involvement of the test taker's individual characteristics in accomplishing a test task. Okay, so we can characterize it in terms of the ways in which the test taker's areas of language knowledge, metacognitive strategies, topical knowledge, and effective schemata are engaged by the test task. So, in other words, interactiveness can be summarized as follows. They are going to ask me to do something in the test. Okay? I have to complete a task in the test. They ask me to do something. Now, if this something that I'm doing involves only linguistic knowledge, that means, okay, filling in with a verb, or putting the sentence in the correct order, or filling in a blank, or matching a thing, all of these things include only linguistic knowledge. That means that I have to use only the language to answer, to know the correct grammatical verb form, or to select between a noun and an adjective. All of these things only require linguistic knowledge. But what happens if the test task requires me to think about my own experience, to give my opinion, to express my feelings, to talk about real life things like my favorite movie, or how I feel about immigration, or what I am most afraid about the coronavirus pandemic. If they ask me to do these things, the test is requiring me to use my knowledge, my metacognitive strategies, my knowledge of certain topics, my feelings or affective schemata, and then in this case the test task becomes interactive, because the test requires me to use my opinions, to involve my feelings, to talk about my knowledge of a topic, and in this case the test becomes interactive because it requires from me more than just linguistic knowledge. It requires me to use information that is very personal. In other words, if you remember, in the construct of communicative competence, we had on the top of communicative competence or proficiency, we had the feelings, the attitudes, the abilities, the knowledge of different topics. So this is interactiveness, the extent to which we have to use more than just linguistic knowledge to answer a task. If we use only linguistic knowledge because we have just required to use language, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, that is not interactive. But if we need to use information, give our opinion, analyze, compare, contrast, in this case the test is interactive. Now let's talk about the impact of a test. An impact refers to the extent to which the test scores are going to cause to produce an effect on society or on the education system, but also on the individuals, on the people who take the test, on the teachers who prepare these test takers, and on the administrators of the program where these teachers work. Okay, so then a test can have a different impact according to the way in which the results of the test show some important information for the society, for the education, or for the people who are involved in the test administration. Now, if you remember, the effect or the impact of the test on people is called the backwash or the washback. We can say it either way. Okay, so the direct impact of testing on individual, this is the washback. Okay, and of course we can also talk about the effect of testing on teaching and learning. We can express impact as how assessment instruments affect educational practices and beliefs. And of course, we need to take into account that test developers, people who write tests, and the test user cannot just simply assume that tests will have an impact on teaching and learning. But these people must actually investigate how the specific areas, directions, and extent of the presumed impact could be useful for their institution, for their society, for their students, for the teachers. Okay, so then impact, we need to look how the scores of the test affect people who take the test, how it affects testing and teaching, right? And then how the instruments can also affect your educational practices and beliefs. Let me just give you a little example here. Imagine that I am teaching you a course we're doing a lot of things. We do role plays and simulations and activities and conversations and lots of things that involve communication and interaction. And then imagine that I give you an exam at the end of my course, and my exam includes multiple choice, fill in the blank, matching tasks, in which I am going to assess only your knowledge of vocabulary and grammar. That means that, okay, I have items and you have to complete with a verb, like in the simple present or in the past perfect or things like that. If you have this kind of test that measures only linguistic elements in this way, of course, what are you going to do next? The thing that you're going to do next is, before you take my exam, you're going to be reviewing all of the verbs, and the past participle forms and all of the grammar, all of the vocabulary, because you know that the only thing that you're going to use in the exam is that information. So you're going to just try to memorize as much as possible all of those forms, all of that information, because that's the kind of thing that you're going to use in the test. And of course, you're not going to practice conversation, you're not going to practice interaction, you're not going to practice writing letters or messages or articles or summaries, because you know that that kind of thing is not going to be necessary for the test. So if I test only grammar and vocabulary, the effect that I'm going to have on my students is going to be very, very negative, because they will not see the point in participating in simulations and role plays if that thing is not going to be on the test. So, summarizing, a test can have an impact on the people who take the test, and basically depending on the kind of experience that the person is going to have when he or she took or prepared for the test. Secondly, depending on the feedback that the users received about the performance on the test. And finally, of course, depending on the decisions that may have been made about these test takers based on the results that they had on the test. The test can also have an impact on teachers, because of course remember that we are the people who prepare students for the test. So sometimes happens that when the teachers know that students are going to give a specific test, they are going to teach only to prepare them for the test. This is something that we call testing for teaching. That means that if I know that you're going to have an exam, the only thing that I'm going to do is to do exercises that are similar to the exam, so that you can be prepared for the test, regardless of other important things that may be important to teach. So, something that we need to remember about the impact on teachers is that we should be able to bring about improvement on instructional practice through the use of tests. So we need to try to use tests that incorporate or that are compatible with our beliefs about effective teaching and learning. That means that if we are teaching in a certain way, we need to look for tests that assess those competences in the same way that it's compatible. That means that we should, if we believe that English language is communication, we should administer communicative tests. If we believe that all that the students need is to develop knowledge of the grammar and some specific vocabulary, then we're going to look for tests that assess only grammar and vocabulary. There has to be a certain level of compatibility between what we teach and what we test. This is very, very essential. And finally, when we talk about the impact on society and the education system, basically we need to know that when we're going to give a test, the first thing that we need to do is to list in detail why we want to use the test. We need to list in detail all of the intended uses. Secondly, of course, we need to list the potential consequences, both positive or negative, of using the test. That means that once we're going to give the test, we need to see, okay, what are the good things that could happen after we give the test? What are the bad things that could happen after we use the test? And of course, we need to rank these outcomes in terms of their desirability. So we're going to see which of these consequences, which of those outcomes we really want to happen, and which ones we'd rather not having them happen. And so it is important to see which of those consequences we would want or not. And finally, we need to collect information about the probability, the likelihood of each of these outcomes. So this means basically summarizing that when we use a proficiency test, we need to make sure about the things that we want to get, and we need to think about the consequences, the impact of using the test. And then we need to collect information so that we know if we are going to obtain the desired results. So testing is like an exact science. We should not improvise. We need to make sure exactly about the kind of things that we want, and then use the instruments that are the most appropriate ones to bring those results. That's why test impact is a very important element of test usefulness. Now, I will give you a specific example for you to see how the selection of tests and the different testing procedures can be useful for program evaluation, for program improvement. So, let me tell you about this. In 2010, the university decided to become international. So we developed, because I was part of the team, this foreign language policy at the BWAP. And basically, what this policy was, what it intended to be, was a platform for the internationalization of the university. And of course, the most important thing that we wanted to get was to increase academic mobility for the students. And of course, what we decided to do is that all of the students in the university should study languages. Okay? All kinds of languages. And we created, in that moment, the new program at the CELE, in which the access was free, and in which the cost of the courses was relatively low, so that all of the students could have access to different languages. And what we wanted them to do was to achieve an A2 level and gradually move to B2. That means that the ultimate goal was for the students to achieve a B2 in an additional language, but we knew that we have to start from A2, so that little by little the students could become more proficient, and then we could achieve a higher level. Concerning the teachers, of course, in this case, for the teachers in our language department, we also thought, what is the level that is desirable for the students to have? And then, of course, we knew that teachers need to have a really high level of proficiency. But we decided in that moment, in the foreign language policy, that an appropriate level would be B2. But of course, what we wanted to achieve ultimately was a C1 or a C2. But we knew, again, like in the case of the students, that we should better start with a B2 to consolidate it, and then to make the students move to a higher level. Basically, the ideal level, of course, will be C2, but I think a C1 was quite acceptable. So, what we found in 3 years after this policy was approved, that means in 2013, when I became the director of the language department, I decided that it was necessary to evaluate the results. So we administered some kind of test, and of course the results that we found were very disappointing. We realized that, for example, from 22 to 2013, only 52 students could obtain their A2 certification. So this was surprising because we thought that an A2 was very easy to achieve. And in 3 years, all of the students of the university, from all of them, because remember that all of the students in the university have to study another language, only 52 of them could obtain their A2 certification. So 52 was a really, really low number. And secondly, we also found that only 18 teachers out of 272 teachers that existed in that moment in our language department had ever taken a proficiency test. And those who had taken a test had taken the TOEFL ITP. This is a version that is, of course, not as reliable as the TOEFL IBT. So, as a matter of fact, what we realized in that moment is that teachers' actual levels of proficiency were unknown. In other words, we had language teachers, but we didn't know for sure because we didn't have any certifications. We didn't know exactly what the level was, and that was a very serious thing. So when I became director, and then I decided that we needed to do something because we needed to improve the level of proficiency, and we needed to carry out this important function that we had at the university as part of the internationalization platform, I decided to administer a language proficiency test to 65 teachers. And these are the results that we found. So we use a diagnostic test only, which is called the Business Language Testing System, BULATS, and it's a test that is very easy to administer because it's computer based, and it measures comprehension, it measures vocabulary, some communicative features of the language, but we just wanted to have a little diagnostic test. So we needed to know in that moment, just like to have an idea of the level that the teachers had, so that later we could give them a real proficiency test that corresponded to that diagnostic. That means that if I had a teacher who obtained in this diagnostic test a B2, I would probably give this teacher a certification test of B2, or probably train him a little more, but I was not going to give this teacher a higher level. If the diagnostic test say B2, I will probably give him a B1 or a B2, but I will not give him a C1 because I would know in that moment that the teacher probably has a B2 level. So these are the results. Let me show you the results. 65 teachers here in our language department. To my surprise, 5 of these teachers in this group obtain an A2 level. That corresponds to 8% of the total population, which in this case 65 teachers. It was also very surprising and very disappointing to find that 25 of these teachers obtain a B1, and of course this corresponds to 38% of the total population of 65 teachers. So as you can see here, we found that these teachers like a total of 30 teachers. Almost half of the teachers had a level that was lower to the level that we want our students to have, because of course the teachers here in the Facultad de Lenguas will probably be required to have a high level, because if we ask for the students to obtain a B2 at the end of the courses, then we expect the teachers to have at least a C1 or preferably a C2. So we found that 26 teachers, okay, that's about 40% of them got a B2, and 6 of these teachers got a C1 in the diagnostic test, and 3 teachers had a C2 level. Now I need to tell you here that if you can see here the kind of levels that we found for the teachers were not very appropriate. We had a great number of teachers with B1, right, and some teachers with A2, and just a little over 50% of the teachers had an acceptable level, which was B2 or higher. But I need to remind you of this thing. This was a diagnostic test, only comprehension, a multiple choice test. It was not really a proficiency test. We just wanted to see what kind of level the teachers had. So when we add all of the numbers, we can see that only 9 teachers, about 14%, were above B2, and that 56 teachers, that's 80%, they had B2 or lower. And of course, if you can see, this is the ideal level for the teachers, above B2, and this is not an acceptable level. We don't want the teachers to be below B2. We want them to be above B2 so that they can work correctly. So basically, we realized that our teachers didn't have an appropriate level of proficiency to do their job, and this was something very serious. So what we decided to do was to bring some changes. We realized that if we wanted the students to achieve a better level, we needed the teachers to have a high level. And so the first thing that we did was to adapt, to create a room for international certification test with all of the requirements that the institutions needed. This means that an appropriate space where we could hold all of those international proficiency tests that we needed in order to prepare the teachers and the students. The second thing that we did was to adapt another room to administer online tests, because there is a great number of exams which are computer based, and we needed to have an appropriate space so that our teachers and our students could prepare for the tests and take the tests. So this was a very important step, to create a space for online exams. And of course, we knew that we also needed to bring the certifications for other tests, and in those years we didn't have a certification for Italian. So what we did is we signed an agreement with the University of Siena so that all of our Italian teachers could be prepared for the test and could become evaluators of this test, which is la certificazione di italiano come lingua straniera, CILS for short. And of course, we also thought that it was important to prepare the teachers to achieve a better level. So what we did was to create a program to help the teachers to become more professional, to improve the level. So we created scholarships for the teachers, where we gave them 100% of the payment for the courses, and we wanted them to certify C1 and C2 for the Delft and C1 of Cambridge. And so we signed 2 agreements, one with the Anglo to prepare the teachers for the Cambridge certifications, and another one with the Alliance Française to prepare the students for the French certifications. So we gave scholarships so that 77 of our teachers could prepare to take the proficiency tests. And of course, this was a very important measure, because then we could have all of the teachers who were in this group to certify their knowledge. This we were on the news, of course, because 71 of our teachers obtained a certification of the levels B2 to C2. Now I want to tell you how this thing happened again. First of all, we decide that if we want the university to be international, the students need to participate in mobility programs. And number 2, if we want the students to participate in mobility programs, we need them to improve the level of proficiency in the language. Now, if we want the students to improve the level of proficiency in the language, then we need to improve the level of the teachers, because the students learn from the teachers, right? And so the second line of reasoning is, we cannot give the teachers a proficiency test if we know that they are not prepared for it. So the first thing that we did was to give them a diagnostic test to know what kind of level we could expect from them. And after the diagnostic test, of course, we took them to classes. They had to prepare for the exams. We didn't send them directly to a certification exam, because we knew that they would probably not succeed. So we sent them to take courses in the Anglo, we sent them to take courses at the Alliance Française, so that later they could improve the level and they could be more successful. So if you see, we had 77 in the group, and out of those 77, 71 teachers, that's almost everybody, could obtain their certification. But we had to follow this procedure. First, a diagnostic test, then you take language courses, you prepare for the test, and then later you take the real certification test. These are the results that we obtained. So in 2012, we had only 18 teachers who had a certification and 252 teachers who did not have any certification. And in 2016, when I completed my term as the director of the Facultad de Lenguas, we had already 228 teachers certified and only 39 who were not certified. So we could make a big change, a big improvement on the teachers' level of proficiency, and we had them prepare themselves, and then we had them to really actually certify the level. And this was a big challenge. It was something that it took a lot of time, a lot of effort, but it made a big difference. So once we could help the students, the teachers, to improve the level, we also had an improvement in the student certification. Okay, so these are the results. I told you from 2010 to 2013 only 52 students could certify the A2 level in the university. But then after we prepared the teachers, we had 876 in 2014, and in 2041 in 2015, and in 2016 we had almost 4,000. So you can see here that when we improve the level of the teachers, we also have an improvement in the level of the students. So there is a positive impact of the test, because first of all, you do a diagnostic, then you prepare the people, then you give a real certification exam, and if you want to improve the level of the students, you improve first the level of the teachers. That's the logic. And of course, I will show you now the results of the academic mobility. So, whereas in 2012, when I started my function as a director of the Facultad de Lenguas, we had only 217 students who participate in mobility programs. And in my last year as director, we had 789 students who participate in mobility program. So there was an increase of over 300% in the number of participants in international academic mobility programs. So if you see, we could have an impact on the institution when we decided to improve the level of teachers, so that the level of the students could also improve. And of course, after we got these improvements in the student mobility, the next step that we did was to have the programs accredited, because with this important achievement, that was the fact that the students participate in mobility programs, we could prove that our language programs were of high quality. And for that reason, with all of other things that we did as well, we could accredit the programs. So the tests that we administered had an impact not only on the students who improved the level, not only on the teachers who improved the level, but also on the institution, because we could increase the internationalization and because we could accredit the programs. Let's go back to the teacher certification process. What are the steps that we took to ensure that the testing process had a positive impact on teachers and the institution? First of all, if you remember, we administered a diagnostic tests with bullets, and the purpose of this was simply to have an idea of what was the possible level that teachers had. Once we could determine the approximate level, in this case, we registered the teachers into preparation courses where everything was for free. So that means that once we knew the specific level that the teachers could achieve, we prepared them so that they could make sure that they achieved the level. And finally, of course, the last step was to give them a proficiency test with Cambridge or Delft. So this last step, once that we diagnosed the level and once that we prepared the teachers for a specific course, we gave them a proficiency test, and not any kind of test, a very prestigious kind of test, which of course is very valid, reliable, interactive, authentic, and had a positive impact on the students, on the teachers' professional development. Because as you probably know, not only are these exams very prestigious, but they are also certifications that do not have an expiration date. These certifications are forever. Now, so let's remember the impact essentials. What do we need to know in order to have or to cause a positive impact with the use of tests? First of all, we need to remember that the primary objective of evaluation and testing should be improvement. That means we administer tests because we want to make things better. Secondly, we need to remember that if a test does not result in anything positive, we should not give the test. So we need to foresee before we give a test what the impact is going to be, so that we can make sure that the outcome of the administration of the test will be positive for the people and for the institutions involved. And of course, we need to make sure that the testing experience is positive, because testing should not be a punishment. Testing can also be enjoyable, and we need to make sure that we provide a certain level of ease, a certain level of comfort for the teachers, so that they feel that the efforts that they're making are going to be worth it. In this case, of course, our teachers could obtain an international certification for free, and they could see the result of the work. So in the end, they were motivated, they felt satisfied, because they realized that they could do something important, that they could certify a high level of proficiency. And so, as a result of all of that, we need to select tests very carefully, or adapt them, or design them. We should not leave anything to chance. Everything has to be planned, and carefully planned for that matter. Now let's think about this, and I want you to go to the task, which is on our classroom group. First of all, let's imagine what other things could have been different. So just reflect and write on your task sheets, what do you think could have happened if Cambridge tests had been used at the very beginning? That means I take the teachers and I give them immediately a first or an advanced or a proficiency test. Number two, what do you think would have happened if teachers had been punished or fired for not having the appropriate level? So if you remember, in this case, we realized that almost half of the teachers that we tested did not have the appropriate level. But what we did was to prepare them for the level. What if instead of doing that, we would have said, you know what, you don't have the level, so I'm really sorry, but you can no longer teach here, go get another job somewhere else? What do you think would have happened, or do you think it would have been appropriate to do that? And finally, what do you think would have happened if bullets had been the only test used? That means if we had said, okay, you have a bullets certification, and I think that that's enough, there's no need to take Cambridge, because we will have had, like a little document that said what level the teachers had. Do you think this would have been appropriate? Yes or not? So write your answers on your task sheets. Now let's talk about practicality. Practicality is another important element of language testing, and of course we can define it in very brief terms as the relationship between the resources that will be required in the design, development, and use of the test, and the resources that are available. So a test that is practical is one that does not take more resources than we have available. That is the rule. And what do we mean by resources? Of course, there are three different kinds of resources. First of all, the human resources. That means test writers, scorers, raters, test administration, and clerical support, which refers to all of the people who help with the technical stuff, with the cleaning, the people who check the internet is connected, and that kind of thing. There are also, of course, material resources. And in this case, first of all, the space, the rooms for test development and test administration. And if you remember, in the case of a school, we adapted a classroom so that it could become an international certification room. with all of the requirements, with all of the equipment, with all of the materials that the testing institutions require. And finally, of course, there is another very valuable resource, which is time. And tests could be take some time to develop, or maybe we need time to work on the design, on the writing, on the administration, scoring, or the analysis of the test. And all of this is important because some tests are very practical in the sense that, like, they're computer based, you click, and at the end you get the results. And there are other tests that you have to order, and then you receive them by any of these kinds of messaging services, and then you organize the administration, and then the students take the test, and then you put the test in a box, and you send them back to the testing center, and you wait for the results. And sometimes it takes 1 or 2 months to know the results that the student have. So time is also an important factor in practicality. So going back to the notion, a practical test is a test that does not require any more resources than you have in terms of human resources, material resources, and time. Just to give you a little example, practicality includes also the cost of the test. So we need to make sure that we have enough money to cover all of the expenses of administering a test. And I'm going to give you some examples with some tests. The TOEFL ITP costs between 950 and 1100 pesos. The first certificate in English, that is the B2 level, costs between 4,450 pesos and 5,020 pesos. The certificate of proficiency in English will cost between 4,950 pesos and 5,327 pesos. If you remember, this is the level C1. And of course, Aptis is not so expensive. It will cost between 675 pesos to 1,369 pesos, but we need to take into account that we will only be tested on 2 skills, normally the passive skills. And if we want to take the full test, we'll need to pay between 2,030 and 2,150 pesos. Concerning linguistical, this costs between 1,050 pesos and 1,200 pesos. And of course, Trinity College London, the B2 test will cost about 4,132 pesos, whereas the C2 level of the same test will go over 5,300 pesos. Finally, IELTS will cost you, a little more than 4,000 pesos. We need to remember that the cost of these exams are either in dollars or in pesos, so these prices that I'm showing you could vary. They could go higher or lower, but these are like the prices that you will find right now in the market. Now, we also need to talk about acceptability. And something that we need to remember is that sometimes giving a test can be also a political decision. It is an academic decision, but it also becomes political, because sometimes there are a number of personal, group, and institutional interests or concerns that may interplay, with the test administration, or even cause some kind of collision, some kind of problems between, the people in the institution. And of course, these must be resolved by performing a cost-benefit analysis and looking at the ultimate goals of the testing policy. So if you remember about the testing process that I told you that I carried out when I was the director of the School of Languages, it was something that everybody was afraid of. To tell you the truth, the teachers were afraid of taking an exam. Not only were they afraid, they were like terrified. And of course, everybody hated me for like kind of pushing them or motivating them into taking a certification test. And of course, I knew in that moment that the important thing for me was to improve the student's level. And if I wanted to improve the student's level, I needed to improve the teacher's level first. So I did it, even though I knew that I was going to be hated for this, because I knew that it was something important and that the results for the institution, the results for a school will be greater than any other kind of problem that could have been caused. Of course, when the teachers asked me if I was certified, of course I was certified. I hold the C2 level in English, and of course I got like merit and distinction in the different skills. And concerning French, I also had a certification from the Université de Paris-Sorbonne, and so I could demand them to certify the level because I was certified myself. So this, you see this, there's also this problem. If people who are organizing a testing system have to be prepared. They have to be the ones who set the example, because somebody who does not have an appropriate level cannot lead or guide or even force other people to attain a level, because probably himself or herself will not have it. So it is important too to be an authority when you give tests. Okay, to summarize the content of this unit, how can we know what is the most appropriate test, or how can we determine if the exams that we design are appropriate or not? We call this test usefulness, and it's made up of construct validity, reliability, impact, interactiveness, authenticity, and practicality. And if you remember, construct validity refers to the extent to which the score of the test reflects real proficiency. Reliability concerns the fact that the scores of the test are consistent. That means that they do not vary. The impact, of course, refers to the positive effect that, or negative effect that, a test can have on people and institutions, and it's very important to consider it. Interactiveness refers to the fact that some tests could measure more than just linguistic knowledge. Authenticity, if you remember, refers to the fact that the test task and the content should resemble real language use. And finally, practicality means that the test should not require more human and material resources than you have available. So this is the summary of test usefulness, the qualities of language tests. I want just to conclude by giving you 3 important principles when we talk about test usefulness. First of all, we need to realize that we want to do what is important to us is the overall usefulness of the test, not just the individual qualities. We want to have a global assessment of how useful the test is. The second point to take into account is that the individual test qualities, reliability, validity, and so on, cannot be evaluated independently, but we need to assess them in terms of the combined effect on the overall usefulness. So test usefulness is a complex element because all of these components that we saw have to be seen as a whole, and we need to look at their combined effect. And finally, of course, the thing that is going to be most important is the appropriate balance among the different qualities. Okay, so we cannot prescribe, we cannot say that something is better in the absolute, but we need to look at the specific testing situation and see which of the elements are more important. In some cases, you will want the test to be more practical. In some other cases, you will want the test to have more construct validity. Or in some other cases, you will need for something that is more authentic or more interactive. So we cannot predetermine the appropriate balance of the qualities. It will depend on the specific testing situation. So you always need to be analyzing all of the elements and see which of those are more important in a given moment. So going back to the question, which test to choose? What will be the answer now? ELAS 2, TOEFL, TOEFL Junior, IELTS, APTIS, Cambridge, TOEIC, or Trinity College London. We will end this unit with a little task that you will see in a classroom group. So there are 6 questions. You have to explain which test you think will be the best for these situations that are presented. Number 1. Which of these tests should be used to determine the proficiency level of late graduates? That means that if I want to evaluate your proficiency at the end of your studies, what will be the most appropriate test that I should choose? Question number 2. Which of these tests could be used if we wanted to determine the level of a great number of people, so that later we can give them a Cambridge test? Which exam will be better of the ones that we looked at to test, to assess the level of a great number of people, to give them later a Cambridge test? Number 3. Which of these tests you think will be most appropriate for an immigrant who's moving to the United Kingdom for work reasons? Number 4. What test should be used to measure LAY's teacher's proficiency, in this case the teacher's proficiency? Number 5. What test should a person wanting to go to study a master's in the USA take? And finally, number 6. Which of these tests would you recommend for a person who needs a quick certification of whatever level he or she may have? So I want you to look at the materials. I uploaded all of the test syllabus. You will see IELTS and the TOEFL, ITP, and the TOEIC, and all of the tests. And I want you to look at them, like think your answers, and we'll be checking this. But I hope that right now the objective is that you have a good idea of how we analyze the usefulness of a test. How do we determine which test is the best to give? We call this test usefulness, and it's very important to take into account. When you become a language teaching professional, you will need to decide, and you will make an informed decision if you understand these basic principles. So thank you very much, and I will see you in the next lesson. Goodbye.